Cheers, man. Thank you. Good morning. Wow, it's really great to be here in Riga. I'm already tired from all the stamping and cheering, so I'm glad to be on first. My name's Andy. That was a really great introduction, so I don't need to explain who I am. I want you to think about when you're creating a brand new product or service, a product or service that maybe hasn't existed before. For instance, like this Death Star. And you're designing it to solve a particular problem, in this case, the rebel scum. You don't really care how well it's designed, you kind of just want the problem to go away. Now, we see this lack of care in early stage products in a lot of different places. Like this early electric hairdryer, like these early electric hair curlers, or this early device for curing and the treatment of hysteria. It's clear from these examples that the customer experience has really never considered when these objects were created. They were first and foremost seen as engineering problems. However, in the rush to market, many of these products contained critical flaws, like the curler's tendency to set their customer's hair on fire. Incidentally, can anyone tell me what the main flaw was of the Death Star? Anyone? What was that? Air conditioning. Okay, I'm curious to know why you think that was. Anyone else?
Singular point of failure.
Singular point. Okay. Have you seen Rebel One? Okay, then you know that was actually a feature, not a bug. Sorry to give the plot away. Weirdly, I actually think the main design flaw of the Death Star was the lack of handrails. I don't know if any of you have noticed this. Like, everywhere you've got these high steps, you've got Darth Vader and Government Tarkin wandering along. They could slip on a wet floor, they could fall over, they could hurt themselves. That's not good design. Now that's a fairly small fall. Look at this. Look at that gigantic hole there. There's no cones, there's no little yellow, black and white stripes there to let people know that's a dangerous area. That is a health and safety nightmare. This scene, this one really scares me. Look at there's loads of stuff going wrong here. Look at how narrow the walkway is. You can barely fit two stormtroopers on there. They've got really bad peripheral vision. I reckon there's loads of health and safety claims. I reckon probably every 3 or 4 days, some poor stormtrooper, some poor clone falls down there to their death. And then don't even get me started about where this access panel is. I mean, that is mental. Look at how small the gap is. But I think my favourite bad piece of design in the Death Star is this thing here, the world's most powerful laser beam. And look at just the little step that these people are standing on. No barrier. That person's shoe is even halfway over the step because he can't fit all the way on. Again, that is really, really dangerous. And you know why this happened? Probably one of the designers went to their senior exec and Government Tarkin was like, I want it to look more evil. And what's more evil than having no barriers? So again, this is just a little aside, but every time you watch a science fiction movie, look at the lack of barriers all over the place. Evil equals bad health and safety, no barriers. Anyway, so that was just a little silly aside. Let's get back to the point at hand. Let's look at consumer products. Despite all these new product flaws, you'll always find a few early adopters. You'll find people that are willing to try the immature products for the benefits they bring. The challenge is, over time, less forgiving users will come on board. And they'll start to notice all the annoying little flaws with your product. And these flaws will get bigger and bigger. They'll notice, for instance, that your product's ugly, especially maybe compared with the other products in the marketplace. They might find it confusing, different signals, different messages going on. And if you've ever been in a foreign country and had to try and buy a ticket on a subway, they just find it really frustrating and difficult to use. Now, it's easy to see why these issues occur. Somebody goes out and gathers business requirements, creates a list of all the things they think the product needs to do, and asks the team to add these products into their design flow. And as the product grows and matures, more and more stuff gets thrown in. And a lot of the frustration, I think, is as the product evolves, new users, like existing users, are kind of grown up with the product, and so they get used to these new additions. But brand new users coming in into like a slightly more mature product find this kind of stuff completely overwhelming. So it's really intimidating for new users. I think this happens partly because the teams who are generally working on products are taught by Silicon Valley to eat our own dog food. We're taught to kind of build things that we ourselves use. However, that means over time we get really used to the products we're working on. We become super users. And then when we ask these super users to design for other people, they naturally design for other super users. We've effectively lost that beginner's mind. Whereas what we should really be designing is products like this that are just immediately simple, that users can pick up and just use without the need of sort of manuals or instructions or feeling overwhelmed. Now, early stage startups at this sort of point in their growth often look towards design to help solve these problems, as they should. However, unless the founders or the engineering team sort of come from a design background, it's really hard to know what good design looks like. It's even harder to kind of hire designers that are going to do the job right, particularly if you're just judging them based on whether they've got a nice looking portfolio, rather than the quality of the problems they're solving. And so a typical sort of case, at least in the UK, is you'll go to Dribbble, you'll find a cheap designer with a nice looking portfolio, and then they won't really work out. So you go to Dribbble again and you'll find another designer with a slightly more impressive looking portfolio, and you keep going and you keep going. Unfortunately, whereas these people are thinking they're hiring designers, they're really hiring stylists. They're hiring people that kind of work in what I call first order design, and I'll talk a little bit about different orders of design later. Somebody who is really just mimicking current trends, trying to please their employer and trying to make the interface look nice, but lacking any real depth. Out of interest and a bit of a side, does anyone know who this person is? I want a show of hands if anyone's seen or heard of this person before. Nobody at all. I'm really, really glad to hear that. This is a chap called Derek J from a TV show in America called Hair Battle Challenge. And they do things on their TV show like make the Eiffel Tower of hair. And actually, I think a lot of designs, early designs, particularly from these kind of Dribbble designers, are sort of like the digital equivalent of the Eiffel Tower of hair. It's all creativity over substance. And actually, when you start to use it, it's completely unpractical. My friends at Intercom, Paul Adams and Des Traynor, call this the dribbleization of design, kind of like reducing design to its really sort of lowest common denominator. As a result, by the time these sort of early startups get to that holy grail of product market fit, they find that they've kind of hit the end of their funding runway. Or alternatively, somebody's come along and kind of beat them to it, made a better product, got better market fit. And so I would argue that the technology dead pool is littered with the graves of startups that fail to reach this sort of product market fit by mistaking it for an engineering problem. And I believe that product market fit is not an engineering problem, it's a design problem. Now, in the tech world, this problem has a name. It's called Crossing the Chasm. There's a famous book called Crossing the Chasm, all about how startups go from sort of early innovative ideas to kind of mass market. And it's really tough. How do you move from this kind of like, early adopter sort of mode into something that has this sort of broad appeal? Now, I would argue there's a real big challenge here because on the bottom of this curve, when you're sort of starting something new, it is mostly a technology problem. It's just a case of getting up and getting in front of customers. And so companies that have had success, they've had success by just throwing more developers at it, more engineering power. However, to jump to the other side of the curve, it's not an engineering problem anymore. It's a customer experience problem. To get mass market buy-in, you need to create products and services that have an amazing customer experience, that have really high usability. And actually what you tend to find in the startup world at least, in order to kind of jump from that early adopter market to the sort of early majority, that's where your kind of Series B funding comes in. And whenever startups get Series B funding, one of the first things that funders usually do is look at the product and say, you guys really need to fix the UX here. However, crossing the chasm is difficult. If you've always been doing something one way and it's always been successful, and now you're being asked to do something completely different, it can be a real difficult job to shift culture. However, I think it's necessary Because I would argue that technology is becoming more and more commoditized. It's now easier and easier for your competitors to outcompete you in technology stakes. It's more and more easy for somebody younger, smarter, or with more money than you pretty much to copy your tech stack in a matter of weeks, if not months. So if you're standing at this precipice and you've got all your competitors sort of chasing after you, what do you do? Well, if you do nothing, I'm sorry to say, it could be game over for your new product. Because very quickly your competitors will reach what we call feature parity. Your competitors will very, very quickly be able to copy all of the tech you've done, all of the features your product has. And when that happens, what have you got left? What have you got that's unique about your product? Maybe it's some of the unique deals you've cut. That's very true. You know, deals are very important. Maybe it's your first move advantage. Maybe you got to the market quickly and actually you've got more users behind you. Maybe you've got better distribution channels, or maybe you've got a lower price point. But if you're focusing on price alone, that really is a race to the bottom, and that's a really challenging space to be in. I believe that one of the few differentiators tech companies have, and by extension any digital product or service has, is the ability to differentiate through amazing brand and amazing customer experience. Because it turns out that design actually is hard. Good design is even harder. It's hard to achieve, and it's really hard to replicate. I see design almost like the DNA of a product. Even small variations in your design, an extra checkbox here, a different button style there, can combine in thousands and thousands of unique ways and create very, very different user experiences in the minds of your customers. And also, users are very, very good at sensing what works and what doesn't, because they're using more products on a day-to-day basis that aren't your products than they are using your product. So we get very, very particular these days, very, very kind of judgmental about design. We're also very good at sort of spotting knockoffs. So if you're kind of like producing a really, really amazing design, it's quite difficult for your competitors to actually copy it without looking like they're copying you. What I'm showing you now is 100 years of evolution of those three products I showed you earlier. Initially, the innovations are still very technical. Smaller components, more powerful motors, all wrapped up in a slightly nicer looking package. However, there comes a point very quickly of diminishing returns where the technology alone can't move you forwards. And as we move from the consumer trends of the 70s and 80s, design takes over from engineering. It suddenly becomes not how the product works, but how it feels to use. It becomes about the experience. Now, the challenge everyone in this room faces is your customers don't have 100 years for you to get your design shit right. They expect a fantastic product evolution in about 4 or 5 years' time. They expect you to cram 100 years of innovation that would normally happen in a physical product into 5 years of a digital product. And that's really hard to do. So basically, we're talking about design and the value of design here. When most people think about design, I tend to find they focus on the surface level, the aesthetics, the appearance. And don't get me wrong, appearance is really important. You can create desire, you can drive desire for your product just by having something that looks beautiful alone. I mean, who would have considered something as boring and dull as a house thermostat could be like a new, attractive, exciting sort of a consumer proposition? We've had thermostats in a home for many years, but just adding a veneer of design to it makes this thing that was ignored something that people were craving. And interestingly, there's strong academic evidence that shows that products that just look nicer are perceived to be easier to use. It's known as the aesthetic usability effect. So just on this kind of like surface level, you can have a good effect with design. This is known in the industry as first order design, focusing on the look and feel and pretty much nothing else. Also, unfortunately, this is sort of where most people think design stops. This is their sort of like worldview of design, because it's pretty much the most obvious thing they can grasp hold of. However, aesthetics will only take you so far. As anyone who's ever tried to make juice using this Philips Stark juicer, Juicy Salif, will attest, it looks beautiful, but it gets more juice on your hands and the work surface than it does in the glass. So just being a beautiful object alone isn't enough. This is where we move into what's known as second order design. Second order design is not just about what the product looks like, but it's how it feels to use. It's that satisfying friction feel when you twist the Nest thermostat and the way that the kind of the letters and numbers animate. It's that satisfying clunk of the MagSafe adapter on your Mac. And I think it's a real shame that Apple kind of ditched that, because that was a beautiful design touch. And it's the sound of a car door closing, that sort of satisfying thunk as you close a well-made door. These may seem like trivial examples, but in the industry, these are known as delighters. And what they do is they hint at the quality beneath. If a car door sounds really well engineered, then you assume that the whole car is well engineered. And when we live in a world where you don't really understand engineering anymore, and you're not likely to open the hood of the car and be able to tell whether it's well done, these small signifiers have a massive meaning. In fact, the engineers at BMW know this so well. They have 100+ sound designers at BMW designing every single sound you interact with the car. The sound of the doors closing, the sound of the windows going up and down, the engine sound. They sometimes pipe artificial sound in through the speakers just to make it feel like you've got this engine revving. It's amazing the level of detail people go to. In the digital world, I'd say that sort of animation plays heavily into this role. We've seen a massive rise in the use of animation over the past few years, in large part due to mobile devices. The fact that the affordances are kind of crammed into this small screen, we need to kind of give more indication that things are interactable. The satisfying bounce when you pull down your news feed and it kind of sort of bounces up and there's a little animation. It's almost addictive. In fact, it is addictive. The majority of designers that I know stop at this level, the kind of like the desire level. This is where I think companies like Clearleft and people in the audience step in. This is what's known as third-order design. This is the kind of human-computer interaction element. This is the user-centered design element. This is how people actually interact with your products and services. Nest isn't just a beautiful-looking device. It's part of an ecosystem. It's simple and elegant to use. It's got a great interface. But it's also a learning product. It understands how it's used. You know, if you turn up the heating really, really high, it probably assumes, you know, most other thermostats would assume that you just want to have a really, really hot house, because that's how thermostats work. The Nest realizes, okay, well, this person's ranked up the heating. They probably don't want it to be super hot. They probably just want it to heat up really quickly. And so it learns and it adapts. And like I say, it's part of an ecosystem. There's a whole family of apps. There's other products and services that fit in. This is great interaction design. Now, this type of design, unfortunately, is a lot less tangible. It's less about bits and bytes, less about physicality. It's more about solving more conceptual problems. And these problems aren't necessarily easy to grasp. So there's a lot of user research, a lot of co-design, a lot of sketching, modeling, mapping, prototyping. This is how third-order designers think through problems. This is how they see and explore the world. It's a process known as abductive reasoning. As humans, we essentially have 3 modes of problem solving. Deductive reasoning is the most common. It's the most logical problem solving. It's the kind of problem solving that your tech team are very, very good at. You know, it's logic, 1 + 1 = 2. We also have inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is a kind of reasoning that your business and marketing team use. It's usually looking at data and statistics to kind of infer trends, percentages, probabilities. And like I say, this mode dominates the business world. But the last mode, and the mode that designers are really good at, is what's known as abductive reasoning. I'm not going to go into whole detail about what abductive reasoning is. You can sort of read about it on Wikipedia and various other things. But abductive reasoning is the methodology and mindset that doctors use to diagnose medical problems. It's the mode of thinking that detectives use to solve crimes. It's a process of asking questions, piecing together clues that might not necessarily be connected, spotting patterns and making inferences. It's for problems that don't have a clear answer, that you kind of like, you know, you pull things together and you spot patterns. This is one reason why I think like the best designers, their workspaces look like a crime has been sort of committed. You know, they plaster the walls with all these kind of little clues and hints and sit back and kind of slowly the answers emerge, almost like they're being dug up from the ground like an archaeologist. It's a very humanistic and systematic way of looking at problems. And one of the things I find is a lot of organizations actually lack this third mode of reasoning, this abductive reasoning. So this is something that designers can bring to what is often kind of a lopsided kind of organization. And lastly, we have fourth order design. And fourth order design kind of rises above all that. It looks at this system thinking. It's kind of, where the interaction design world crosses over into the world of design thinking and service design. Classic example of a fourth order design problem would be how the company like Zipcar managed to create its customer experience. It wasn't a group of business owners or BAs going out and kind of doing research and setting up a bunch of requirements. It was a team of researchers that went out into the field. They modelled how existing car booking services worked. They created a user journey map or a service blueprint to look at how it kind of currently worked. And then they kind of spotted all the friction points, the hassle of having to bring your sort of documentation to the car hire place, the actual sort of hassle of having to go to a physical place rather than kind of like just pick it up in your street. They mapped out all of these pain points and then figured out ways how they could basically destroy or change each one, turning a process that would maybe take 20, 30, 40 steps into a process that take 4 or 5. Now, this is a classic example of design thinking in action. And design thinking has become really like the hot new business trend. Companies, especially exec teams, are starting to realize the benefits of design thinking, thanks largely to publications like Harvard Business Review. If you guys aren't reading or subscribing to Harvard Business Review, I would highly recommend you should, because you need, as an audience, to stop talking the language of design and stop talking the language of technology and start talking the language of business. You need to be out there convincing the exec teams you work with that design isn't just on the screen. Design is an activity that can help add real value to the tricky, thorny business problems that they face. And design thinking can be a little bit of a muddied sort of space as well. So this is the definition that I sort of cobbled together myself. I believe that design thinking is really simple. It's a combination of 3 things. It's a combination of deductive reasoning, so looking at a problem through a different lens. It's the use of concept modeling, so taking concepts and ideas that are usually locked in people's minds in terms of words and making them physical, making them tangible, that people can actually see and comment on and interact with. And lastly, it's the utilization of common design tools to solve effectively uncommon intangible problems. So I think as a room full of designers and design thinkers, we're excellently placed to solve a whole range of problems beyond the interface. Now, many companies claim they already get design. Many companies claim they already value design. And yet, if you look at most companies' design output, at the moment, it's still pretty poor. I think there's very few companies in the world that are actually doing a really stand-up job. Now, I don't believe you can claim to get design if you have one designer for every 10 developers, one designer for every 20 developers. If you have one designer for every 20 developers, there's no way those designers can actually support the flow of design work that needs to be done. In this instance, designers aren't doing design, they're firefighting. And if they're firefighting, again, they're not doing design. Design becomes accidental. Design in this situation is happening around the organization, it's just not being done by designers. The product managers are making design decisions, the execs are making design decisions, the BAs are making design decisions, the devs are making design decisions. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. After all, I do believe design is a team sport. But if you don't have designers owning that process, if you don't have designers adding their knowledge and helping other members of the team understand how design should work and understanding the skills and techniques, basically design becomes this. Design becomes accidental. Design becomes hacking around the edges. And this isn't just me saying this. My friend Leah Bewley did a big study at Forrester which showed that companies that really had a high-performing design function within them would have, at most, 6 developers for one designer. And if you've got one designer for every 6 developers, that designer can effectively service those developers. Any more, it becomes problematic. The other way to look at that is for every 2 pizza team you have. Does everyone know about 2 pizza teams? Hands up if you know about 2 pizza teams. Hands up if you don't know about 2 pizza teams. Hands up if you're asleep or you just want me to stop asking you questions. All right, cool. So yeah, I'd quickly explain. So 2 pizza teams, it's an idea that came from Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Big, massive tech teams don't work. The more people you throw at the problem, the more lines of communication there are, the more confusion, the more work that gets wasted. So most tech companies these days have this idea of a 2 pizza team. So 2 pizza team is effectively a team no bigger that can be fed by 2 pizzas. Now here we're talking American pizzas, so these are massive. These are not the tiny little pizzas, that you get, in Europe. But, typically you're looking at a 2-pizza team, maybe maximum of 8 people. So every single team that you work with, every single project or product you're working on, you really should have no more than around 8 people working on that particular feature or particular function. And in that situation, you might have 2 or 3 back-end developers, 1 or 2 front-end developers. You've got to have a product manager on the team. If you don't have an active product management function, you really are not doing good work. And you want to have at least 1 UX designer and maybe 1 visual designer. So at least one designer per 2-pizza team. So what was the point of this talk today? Really, it's about understanding that if you are looking to get that holy grail of product market fit isn't delivered by your developers and it isn't delivered by your product manager. I truly believe that product market fit is the component that your design team can bring. And if we believe, like Mark Andreessen claimed, that software is eating the world, and if you believe what I've stated here today, that design actually offers a huge business opportunity, it offers the opportunity to differentiate yourselves and your products and your services from those of your competitors, then I think it's time for us all to become more designful companies. So thank you very much for your time, and let me know if you have any questions.
All right, and we will look into our very coming to after party. That's the most important question right now. And there was also a question, will there be any snacks at the after party? And the answer officially, yes. So, I guess this will really change the polls on after party admission. Well, we have some Estonian questions. Also, if anybody can help. Or it's just a chat between 2 Estonians in the room. All right. If first order is look and fourth order is design, what is the difference between these 2?
Well, clearly I've done a terrible job of explaining it because that was sort of the point of my talk. So if that answer or that question is still out there, then I do apologize because I've not done a really great job. So first order design is the kind of usually the visual and the aesthetic layer. Second order design is how the product feels to use. Third order design is typically the interaction design, so how you flow through a system of objects or designed objects and how they all join together. So it's kind of the more conceptual design layer. And then fourth order design is effectively how you apply design to problems that don't have a tangible interface. So using techniques of design thinking, using design behaviors to design non-traditional design objects. So service design, for instance, would be a classic example of a fourth order design problem. Let's say that we're trying to design an experience at a hotel. A hotel experience doesn't involve necessarily screens and physical things. It involves designing what it feels like as a person to check into the room, how the hotel staff greet you, how they show you to the room, how the room fits into the whole kind of service experience, how maybe digital touch points can improve that or kind of sort of make it worse. So it's really kind of like the highest order of design, fourth order design, is using design to solve problems, like I say, that aren't typically seen as design problems. So it's not typically a physical output and interface. A classic example, classical tool that service designers would use would be a service blueprint. And a service blueprint is around helping teams orchestrate and coordinate a designed experience rather than designing the experience yourself. So I don't know if that makes any more sense to the person that asked the question. It is quite nuanced and it's kind of difficult. I think if you have a fairly unnuanced view of design, I think most people stop at that first order. But yeah, if you want to come and chat to me later, I'll try and walk you through some other examples.
That's a good idea, thank you. And then 31 person, you just woke up. Are asking, do you publish the slides for us?
Yep, I'll be sending the slides to the organisers, and I imagine they'll be sticking stuff up on SlideShare. So yeah, absolutely.
All right. Do you publish? That was one of the most important questions. But next one is, where do you start when the managers don't get the purpose of UX, which is the most common situation?
Yep. I mean, that's a really difficult, question, and it's one that's been plaguing the industry for many, many years. And there's a bit of a catch-22. I think when you have an organisation that has invested in design, when you've got enough designers in the system, it's really easy to demonstrate value. You've got enough designers to be tracking KPIs and metrics and proving that your design is actually adding value. If you can get to a situation where you can show that for every dollar spent on design, you get $4 or $5 back, which is typically the industry average, then it's relatively easy to make that case. Unfortunately, if you're the only designer in the team and you're having to put fires out the whole time, it's really difficult to prove that. I think part of the ability or the part of the challenge is having strong design leadership. So as well as looking at the ratio of designers to developers, the other sort of piece of information that Forrester came up with, which is pretty obvious, is companies that kind of get design tend to have quite senior design leadership. And when you've got quite senior design leadership, those leaders will then be selling the value of design into the organization. And if you don't have those leaders, then part of your job has to be doing that. And that's why I suggest going and spending less time amongst designers and spend more time amongst business people. There are some really simple tricks and hacks you can do, though. I noticed we've got some kind of sketchnoting going on today. Sketchnoting is a really powerful tool for kind of bringing ideas to life visually. A lot of execs want to have their PowerPoint decks look great. They want to have people in the room that can kind of bubble up ideas. If you're a designer, I think being able to kind of visualize the thought process is really, really useful and really, really powerful. If you can demonstrate to your company that you have those skills of capturing and reflecting back business decisions, you can get invited to some more higher level business meetings, and then you'll kind of start to be invaluable. And a lot of the people I know at places like Adaptive Path, their skill is mostly surfacing strategy through the power and the lens of design. So find a person within your organization that really gets your value and start delivering value to them, and that will sort of slowly sort of grow out. But ultimately, I think there's this sort of frustration that you have to try and evangelize to everybody. And I think if every designer in the room just finds one other champion within the organization that they can convince to care about design as much as you do, then there's two of you. Then each of you two get two more people, and there's four of you, and that grows. The other thing, I'm sorry to say, and this is a little bit harsh, but design is coming. As I said, technology is no longer a competitive advantage. And either your organizations will get design, and they either get it today or tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, or at the end of the day, they might go out of business. They might cease to be competitive. They might cease to be relevant when some new exciting startup comes in and destabilizes the industry. Design and digital transformation, or digital transformation is huge at the moment in America and sort of rest of Europe. Companies are realizing that they have to do things differently. And if your organization doesn't value design, you can try and fight it and try and grow that value, or frankly, you can go to another organization that does. Because at the moment, let me tell you, in London particularly, designers are worth their weight in gold. In San Francisco, companies are being bought. The value in designers are between $1 million and $2 million a head. So if you're kind of looking at a company that's got 10 designers, that will increase your purchase value to about $20 million US. Designers are valuable. I'm seeing design salaries rising, massive, inflation in design. So if you're not being valued by your company now, go somewhere that does value you. That would be my actual advice.
We have 9 Darth Vaders saying that Death Star was quite okay.
I don't know. I mean, I'd hate to be in those sort of HR conversations where the stormtroopers are coming to HR and complaining about the fact that they've broken an ankle, they've fallen off a high cliff. I imagine their compensation rates must be huge in the Death Star. It's obviously difficult to build the Death Star, but just imagine all the kind of, the compensation payout. So, I'd say look at the stats and yeah, but we can have this conversation later.
We have some 5 minutes more for questions, and the next one is, how do you go from 1 to 20 designer to developers ratio to 1 to 3 ratio?
Hire more designers. I mean, this is ultimately it. Like, yeah, I've got a friend of mine that works in the travel business, and 5 years ago he came into a company. I won't say the name, but he came into the company that it had 3 designers. Now it has 60, and that was sort of 5 years. It involves having a passionate design advocate in the company. And you're hiring a designer, you're hiring your fourth designer, hiring your fifth designer, hiring your sixth designer, showing the value they can bring, showing that they can kind of improve the net promoter score, showing that they can reduce dropout in your checkout flow, showing that they can increase conversions. And by demonstrating this slowly, and by bringing people on board, it just happens over time. But like I say, it is a slow and painful process, and it's taken many of us, many years to get to that stage. But also, I think showing statistics, showing to organisations that actually the industry standard is 1 in 6. So if you've got 1 in 20, there's a problem.
And there's another question about statistics, helpful statistics. How fast would a corporation go below if they don't value the design?
How far would they go below?
No, how fast?
How fast?
Yeah. Can we prove that design is really crucial? Maybe for big companies, who cares?
I don't know. So who goes and buys their DVDs from Blockbuster? Who gets their DVD rentals from Blockbuster? No? Who gets their DVDs from Netflix? Okay, exactly. Who streams stuff online from Netflix? Okay, that's an example of design and design thinking. An old model that was stuck in its ways, that had no innovation, versus a new model that has focused massively on design. Who here travels when they travel with Airbnb? Okay, a good proportion of people. How painful do you think the traditional hotel industry are feeling at the moment? Because their whole business model has been destabilized. The challenge is that digital transformation or digital disruption has a lagging effect. Unfortunately, by the time traditional businesses realize that there's a new competitor, that new competitor has already outperformed them. That new competitor has always figured out that product market fit. That competitor is already kind of like geared up for massive growth. And when that competitor then jumps into that massive growth spurt, and it's going to take, what, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for that traditional laggard to catch up, these companies are disappearing. Like I say, how many people are buying CDs online or CDs in stores? No, you're streaming from Spotify. How many people are staying in hotels? No, we're staying in Airbnb. That's an example of how design and design thinking is having a massive destabilizing effect. I can't tell you how quickly it will happen, but when it happens, it will be catastrophic. We're seeing this at the moment in the UK. The banking sector. The banking sector has been really, really slack when it comes to customer experience. And if you look at reviews of banks, traditional banks, they're low. They've got negative net promoter scores. Everyone hates their bank. The problem is, if every bank is crap, if every bank is bad, they don't have a problem. All of a sudden, in the last year, we've had 5, 6, 7 challenger banks. And these challenger banks are putting massive pressure on the traditional banks because they're actually caring about what design is. They're trying to add value. And the real problem with the incumbent banks is now they've got a massive technology stack and they don't have anywhere near enough designers to solve the problem. And so I think we're going to start seeing a lot of problem in the banking industry in the UK. And I think we're going to see this in other sectors coming about. So yeah, you might have 5 or 10 years. You might be able to cruise around with having really, really bad design. But eventually it will catch up because it has in San Francisco and it has in London and it will eventually happen here.
One last question. In-house or outsourced design?
Again, that's a really, really good question, and I think the answer is you need to do both. In the UK, 5 or 6 years ago, most traditional businesses had a really, really poor tech function and almost no design function. So it was pretty much all outsourced. The challenge with that is those design agencies come in, they learn a bunch of stuff about your business, they get better at design, and they take all those skills and they leave and they apply that to the next client they're working, which could be your competitor. So if you're only having an outsourced model, all you're doing is making your competitor or that agency's next client do a better job than you are able to do. And then the other challenge is when that agency leaves, your product basically just stops growing and it kind of disintegrates. This idea that digital is based on projects is wrong. Digital are not projects, they're products. And when you have a product mindset, you don't ever finish. You have a team that's constantly working, improving, and making these things better. So you need to have a good in-house component. However, I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, in the UK at least, the trend's swinging the other way. And for the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of companies have been going, okay, well, we don't want to have any external help at all. We're only going to build internal teams. And that's good to an extent. But what you tend to find is after 2 or 3 years, those companies find it difficult to find the best talent. So they kind of start backfilling with kind of like lower to mid-level skills. Those designers in-house kind of get bogged down by bureaucracy, bogged down by politics. My experience is that things that happen in-house end up taking 2 to 3 times the length of time as it would for an agency to come in. And so I think the best approach is a blended approach. I think maybe 60 or 70%, maybe even more, should be done in-house by building a really high-performance team. And actually one of the other talks I give at the moment is around how companies can build high-performance design teams. But that other 20% of external agency, it's now not to deliver your products and services, but it's to help coach the team. So a lot of the work that my company, ClearLeft, does isn't just coming in and helping deliver design solutions, but helping the design leads, helping the designers, helping the product teams get better at their job along the way. By exposing them to new design techniques, to new methodologies, by giving them the space to fail, by coaching, by training, by bringing these people up. So once we leave a company, maybe we've worked with them 2-3 projects over 18 months' time, we're not needed anymore. So our goal, I think, and a good agency goal, is to go around and help companies get to a point where they don't need agencies, or at least don't need agencies to rely on. So I think it's a balance.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Andy Butt.
Cheers, man.